I'll try not to swear too much.
Okay, so we're recording.
Okay, Mike.
Peter, hi.
To start by, well, congratulating you on this project, because I realise it's quite an epic thing. It's like a mini epic, because what I think you've done is you've written a text for each of these short videos, 12 videos, and those texts are packed with information and knowledge and understanding of these 12 psychological types. You've then used that to make masks and to sort of translate all that information into facial types, which is something I really want to ask you about. How do you do that? And then you've performed it. And well, we'll talk more about the performances later. But as I say, I think it's a mini epic. So the first
very generous.
First question is, how did it start? Where did you get the idea from? What are the origins of this project?
Yeah. So I'd just give a little bit of my background, because that's kind of where it started. So I work in a forensic setting in a medium secure prison. It's a therapeutic community, working with violent male offenders. And I use masks in my practice. And about 3.5 years ago, I thought I needed to develop a mask that could work in a non-performative setting, as in, not so much for an audience where you pay to come and watch a show, but just to be able to be used in psychodrama. So my primary practice is I'm a psychodrama psychotherapist. And so I was using half masks, which you can speak with, and I was using full masks, which you can't speak with. And it felt like we needed something that had the full mask, the information from a full mask, but that could speak. So I started to develop to sort of do some research around that, and found that actually there is a particular way of speaking in a full mask that's not a very wide mouth, that's distracting, but something quite subtle. So alongside that, I was also looking at, so what would be the content for the masks? And because the guys I'm working with have all been diagnosed with different personality disorders, the funding comes through for this TC, this therapeutic community, through what's called the PD pathway. I found that there were these 12 personality disorders, and in the DSM, the statistical the diagnostic statistical manual from the States talks about 10 PDs, personality disorders now, but they used to talk about others. And I found actually there were more personality disorders than are currently seen as such. And then I discovered some research by the late psychologist Willie Bento, who actually did a whole piece of work around personality disorders and the Zodiac. And I thought, okay, this is a very interesting consideration here, because, there's 12, 10, 11, 12, 13 personality disorders if you go back into the DSMs, and there's 12 signs of the Zodiac. And so I started to explore his research and discovered that actually this would be a great way to sort of enter into the masks, particularly with this client base that I'm working with. So I started to create the masks, and, as with artistic projects, it sort of ground to a halt. I didn't have the time, I was too busy. But more recently, with lockdown, I kind of picked up the project again, and started to dig more deeply into it and created the masks. So, you know, the origin really was around the men I'm working with at the moment. Although I've also had a particular relationship with the Zodiac, so it was a sort of a happy marriage.
Mm. And what about the writing of the texts? Because the texts come over as quite artistic pieces. So it sounds like you just took all that information, probably quite dry academic type stuff, and put that into each of the pieces in writing. That's quite a process.
Yes. I mean, I brought together 5 different elements in the text.
Okay.
So, you know, I started with 2 sort of polarized elements. The one was looking at the personality disorders and what it is that people with them struggle with, and the descriptions in the DSM about, you know, what constitutes a personality disorder, and you know, like the narcissistic personality disorder or antisocial personality disorder, histrionic, schizoid, etc., etc. So I took that as one basis for it. And then I looked at the connection with the Zodiac and found through Willie Bento's work that the descriptions of the sort of the more traditional astrological approach to the Zodiac, actually, I found that very interesting. I'm not personally particularly interested in birth charts. I was years ago, but you know, more like these. The Zodiac is in the heavens. It's in the sky. You know, there's something about it that's really significant and relevant. You know, exactly what time we were born and what place and all of that somehow is not of the greatest importance. It was not of the greatest importance for me in initiating this project. So initially, I just took these kind of descriptions from a number of sources. John Wadsworth is a client, a friend of mine, and I looked at some of his descriptions. I'd made masks for him in the past and worked with those. So those are the 2 kind of sources that I initially started with, and then came across the 12 needs as described by Manfred van Doorn, the clinical psychologist from Holland. Yeah, and you know, he's an extraordinary writer. He's now not writing so much as far as I'm aware, and not in English, which is disappointing. But he had a book translated roughly, it wasn't actually published, into English, looking at a whole variety of different kind of personality psychological types, and looked at the needs and linked them to the Zodiac. So I kind of pulled those needs out that Van Doorn had described so beautifully. And yeah, and then I was taken up by the sort of 4th thing that really struck me was world views. You know, personality is quite a sort of spiritual thing, you could say. You know, it connected to worldviews. The way we all see the world really conditions so many of our decisions, our actions, our ways of relating to people, to things, to ideas, and you know, dug into the research of a guy, Mario Betti, who wrote this book recently published by Hawthorne Press, 12 Ways of Seeing the World. And he was inspired very much by Rudolf Steiner's work around worldviews. And he kind of took it another whole level, which is a beautiful book. So, you know, there's 12 worldviews they're working with, and they connect as well to the Zodiac. And I thought, you know, this is really important stuff. There's a lot of these 12s coming together here, you know. and so the connection was very evident, very clear. There wasn't a question really about, you know, which one fits where. There are descriptions about how that fits, and in my research saw that it connected to what I was doing with the personality disorders and so on. And then I took something specifically by Rudolf Steiner, where he talks about the 12 senses. He talks about the sort of the 5 senses that we're all very familiar with, and then he unpacks another whole way of looking at the senses, like you know, he looks at, you know, the sense for sensing the ego in another person, sense of sensing their authenticity, where they're coming from. It's like, you know, he describes that as a sense. And so I started to dig into Steiner's 12 senses and saw the correlation with the work there and brought that into it. And then, yeah, and then, you know, right at the end, I was wondering about these virtues that are there in my videos. So and discovered in another book by a lovely writer, is writing Richard Seddon. He's writing about Mani, and he talks about these. He talks about Madame Blavatsky, you know, the old theosophist, right? He talks about Blavatsky's take on the Zodiac, and how Blavatsky refers to certain qualities that exist within each sign of the Zodiac. These aren't evident, you know, they're not stated in your kind of, dare I say, more average approach to astrology. And then, you know, Steiner also had a take on that. So I worked with those because they really are, I found them as like indications on a kind of spiritual level to ameliorate some of the really overdeveloped tendencies that can arise, say, with the personality disorders. So anyway, you know, that those kind of 5 things, not 4, 5 things, kind of comprised my research, which took a couple of years, really, just chipping away here and there.
Wow, that's a lot of content to put into those pieces. I found in watching them that, of course, the first one you watch is your own sign. And I think the first thing you hear is sort of like the positive qualities. You know, yes, that's just like me. And then you start to hear the negatives and the weaknesses and limitations and so on. And you think, well, okay, maybe I've got that as well, and I struggled with that. And then it seemed to me that between those two, the strengths and the weaknesses, the essential point of the piece is that each sign, if you like, each type, has this kind of spiritual direction that we're born with. That each sign has its sort of stance towards life, and it's the direction that you're trying to go in, and you're helped on the one hand, and you have hindrances on the other hand. So I think what you just said sort of fits with that very well. Maybe my question is that when you're watching them, having watched your own, you watch your friends and your family, and and you think again, oh yes, that's just like that person. That explains that. But you then also come across some where you think that doesn't fit at all. And I wonder if you have any thoughts about that.
Sure. Yes. I mean, it comes to this question about birth signs. Because, you know, the birth signs and the Zodiac kind of connects, you know, it's about the birth signs in many people's minds. You know, you read the newspaper and you got your birth sign there, and you can read that up, and you know, you get your birth sign for the day or the week or whatever it is. You know, and you can get different levels of depth and intricacy that kind of can reveal more and more about yourself. So nobody is just one birth sign, in terms of what the zodiac refers to. There's where's your moon, and where's the sun, and what's the rising sign, all that kind of stuff constitutes the work of the astrologer. But that's not personally where I'm coming from with this one. I mean, I can see by the feedback that, there's a lot of interest. Like you say, people watch their birth sign and they kind of go, yes, that's me. Yes, that's me. Oh, this bit's not me. And they email back and say, Mike, this bit is spot on. This bit's not spot on. And I feel the same about my birth sign. My take, I suppose, is more that, all of them are important. I know I do. So in doing these, I realize that I've got aspects of all of these different zodiacal signs, all of these different personality structures. There are elements of them that speak to me, irrespective of my birth sign. Now, an astrologer who does my birth chart, for example, and goes really deep, might dig that stuff up anyway. I don't know. I think that's the genius of that work, or the superstition of that work, however you see it. I don't, don't need to go into that right now. That's another conversation. But, my interest is not so much on, when and where I was born and how all of that fits together, but more that, as human beings walking on this planet, or, existing, being born, there's so many forces that are at work within us, and to limit myself to only one, I think is kind of cruel, personally. I think, like Manfred van Doorn says in one of his lectures, he says, the more gods you can kneel before, the freer you are. The founder of psychodrama, he says it in his ways. He says the more roles you can perform, or the more roles you can take, the freer you are. And in his mind, in his eye, what he was describing there was that, people who are really mentally ill usually get stuck in one or two roles. First, people with personality disorders get stuck in one or two roles. So the more roles you can access, the freer you are, the more healthy you are. He says the more roles you can play, the fewer people would be in hospital with mental issues. So that's kind of, so for me, it's a broader palette. It's to say, which of these do I feel connected to, irrespective of my birth sign, which might be overdeveloped, which might be underdeveloped. And then, later on the question might arise, well, what can I do about that? That's perhaps a self-development, a therapy question. But yeah, I suppose that's my take. It's, these 12 worldviews. If we get stuck in one worldview, or however many worldviews, it could be 20, it could be 6, whatever it is. But if we get stuck in one, we limit ourselves to that. It's a classical thing of these scientists or whatever looking at an elephant, and the one says they study it for a couple of hours, and then they're interviewed, and the one says, yeah, it's got these big gray things that stick up like this, and another one says, well, actually it's got these big white things that go like this. And from different perspectives, you're describing one aspect of the elephant. But if you want to know the whole elephant, you've got to listen to all the points of view of these scientists, and then you get a whole picture. So I suppose for me, it's about the whole. The parts are exceptionally interesting and important, and we all have one-sidednesses, which needn't be wrong, but it's more about, if we get stuck in them, we create wars. We're in inner turmoil. Like the whole COVID thing now, is it all a hoax, or are we all going to die tomorrow? It's like you get these polarized positions, Brexit, whatever it is. And how can we kind of broaden our perspective to understand different points of view that perhaps don't coincide with our natural worldview, but are equally as valid and can inform our worldview, even if we don't subscribe to it entirely. So it's also opening up tolerance to the others, but also tolerance to what I'm having to use to understand the world. You know, there's so many complex ideas, and it's not always easy to navigate one's truth.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And since we mentioned Brexit and COVID, perhaps we can move quickly on to to the making.
Another conversation. Yeah.
Move on to the making of the masks and the performance. And as I said earlier, I was very interested how you get from these ideas to sculpting a human face for the mask. And now you have your own very well developed style of mask making, or of mask, and it'd be interesting to hear about that, where that comes from, but then also how you get from these ideas about the psychological type to actually sculpting noses and features and chins, and I noticed on some of the masks, I think it was particularly Cancer, I think, which had some sort of indentations kind of up here somewhere and down it, which you would never see on somebody's face unless they had a really bad accident. And yet it was utterly expressive and actually quite moving to see. So I just wondered how that comes about. How do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many factors that influence that. I think just to speak to the first part of your question around, you know, how to, in a way, make the masks from an idea. I think this for me has been the major part of my work as a mask practitioner over the last sort of 40 years, really, which is, you know, to take an idea, create a mask from it, put it on, and then you begin to experience the idea from the inside. So that's the sort of journey I'm on, and how to do that is a whole lot of different things. I've done the research. So, you know, researching personality in this instance, you know, I was researching personality, researching the Zodiac, researching worldviews and so on, finding sources in, for example, the signs. So, for example, in Scorpio, it's going to get a mask. So in Scorpio, which is that one, I was sort of working with this, almost the sense of the scorpion. I mean, I know scorpions don't look like this, but the sense of Scorpio also connecting to pain, to death, to rebirth, you know, resurrection, you know, to sort of the dark. So there's something about, you know, and the personality disorder connected with this is the antisocial personality disorder. So there's something quite forceful. It's about power. There's a huge sense of power here. So, you know, I took these elements and I would draw, you know, draw sketches, maybe look online, find images, model small maquettes. I don't have any available right now, but you know, and do a series of the masks, do some prototypes. I mean, I did some prototypes actually some years ago, which were just very crude, and refined them a lot in the last kind of 18 months. And, you know, so from an idea, it then becomes like something which is embodied only in the face, but then can be embodied in the body. So the whole notion then is the embodiment of an idea, of a concept. And yeah, I mean, one sees that in Bali, for example, you know, the Balinese mask makers, you know, I was studying out there almost 30 years ago. They're extraordinary because they have these kind of, they'll sit down on the ground and put a piece of wood between their feet and will start to carve, and they'll won't have a picture in front of them. They won't have a drawing. They won't have necessarily, you know, a photograph, but they'll have a sort of inner template of what this mask, you know. So for example, for the witch Rangda, the mask maker knows. He knows the strokes, he knows the gestures in the wood with the chisels and the tools and the planes and the files. He knows. And within a short space of time, this piece of wood gets transformed into the basic, you know, witch Rangda, which is later, you know, refined. But this, you know, this process then is, for them, it's something which is inherently part of their culture. For us, it's slightly different in the Western world because we don't have those traditions. So it's a little bit more, you know, there's more kind of research and reference and trial and error that goes into it. You know, and these masks, I don't think are definitive. They're just my latest sort of take. And one could, you know, you would make your own 12 or however many in your way. And if 12 of us made 12, we could get each of our Virgos together and kind of go, okay, so there's perhaps 12 different Virgos here. So between us all, we'd maybe have a true Virgo, you know, a true personality type, you know, connected to Virgo. So, yeah, it's quite complex. It's this meditating, you know, it's walking in the hills with the idea, you know, with the dog, and not looking at the view. I'm looking inwardly. What is this being about? You know, what is trying to create some space for something to come through, you know. So there's also that sort of more meditative thing that's required, you know. It's not just in the doing and the making and the analyzing and the seeing. It's almost like making an inner space for something to become present. Like, you know, I there's this incredible mask maker, Ninian Kinnear Wilson, who died about 8 years ago. But, you know, we were comparing our mask making styles, and I was saying, yeah, I do all this reference and I do all this kind of, I find research and I make models and all of that. I said, what do you do? I said, go down the pub. I don't do anything. He said, I stop myself from starting. I stop myself from starting until I'm literally brimming over with the first movement of my thumb in the clay, you know, and until I can't hold myself back. And then I start and it just happens. So brilliant. I thought there's a beautiful approach, you know. He was a very wise man. And yeah.
Could you say a word about the colour of the masks? Because they're very interesting. They're not skin tones really, but they obviously not just random colours. How did you arrive at those?
Yeah, there was a question about that. You know, I was thinking where to go with the colouring, because, you know, making them fleshy would be perhaps the easiest on the eye in terms of them being more kind of human. But at the same time, you know, I felt they're not only human, they're very extreme. There's something more than human about them. And so I wanted to kind of find a way of coloring them that allowed this bigger than human element. I settled on two pieces of research that informed it. I started off looking at color therapy and looked at the sort of, well, the mainstream sources of call it mainstream, but you know, found online these color therapists, and there was a particular consistent color that they all agreed on particular zodiacal signs. I'll just get another mask. So, for example, Yeah, this is perhaps one of the most extremely colored ones. This is Leo. So what I found was the primary color for Leo in the sort of what I found on the web was red. And so I started off and I created the base coat in red, and I did the same with all the other masks. And then I wasn't quite sure where to go with it. And I, in my research, discovered that Goethe, Wolfgang von Goethe, he did an incredible piece of research around what he called his, what did he call it? The color spectrum. Can't remember the exact reference name he referred to, but basically Goethe came across 12 colors. So Newton basically looked at the 7 colors of the rainbow. He looked in a prism and he said, you know, you've got your red, orange, yellow, you know, green, blue, purple, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple, lilac. Okay. So, you know, and that's what science has gone with, you know, that is color. That's what makes up our color. And of course it does on a certain kind of material level. But Goethe went another level and he said, okay, well, what about going beyond just what presents us in the day, in the bright sunlight, and he started to explore what he called the night colors. And he had a whole lot of more subtle, very subtle colors, which, you know, he came to 12. Into 12 colors, right? Not 7, but 12. So we got another 12 here. So yeah, I thought, well, these 12, everything's like 12. You know, you've got your 7s, 7 days of the week, you know, your 7-year cycles, if you like, or you know, there's so many like 7s, there's 12s, you know. And so I thought, okay, let's explore this, and kind of found another person who had taken Goethe's stuff and referred that to the Zodiac. So I kind of started to play with that, but I was confused and I didn't quite know how to do it. And I went to sleep one evening, and I'd had this friend who worked with me in the mask studio. She was a colorist, and when she died of cancer, I ended up getting a lot of her paint. It's down here in my painting drawers. And I thought about her before going to bed, and I thought, you know, what would you have done? You know, she's a colorist. She's incredible. She was phenomenal. Had this incredible sense of color. You know, she worked with colored cloth and veils and, you know, all sorts of quite unusual approaches. So I sort of thought about Valerie and, you know, really said, what would you do, Val? You know, what would you do? And in the morning, I woke up and I just went in the studio and just painted. And I do feel like in her way, she was there kind of giving me permission basically to play. But I played with it with a responsibility to the signs of the Zodiac and these personality types. So Goethe refers to Leo, well, not Goethe, but the research, as light blue, this particular kind of blue. Whereas traditionally it's red. So I kind of was informed by something much more materialistic, if you like, in approach, and then something far more subtle. And I like that. For me, that is the sort of meeting of, you know, we have to be really contemporary people in the world working with each other. And at the same time, we can also be informed by something that's less earthly and less mainstream. And so that was my approach.
Right. There's so much to talk about color there. I'm just thinking that the red and the light blue are, if they're the right red and the right blue, are complementary colors.
Yeah.
Which is interesting to go into. Yeah. Okay. Perhaps we go on to the performance, how you created the performances. Which, now I don't know anything about acting, but I noticed in these that it's kind of upper body acting. It's it's head and shoulders, really. You don't even use hand gestures, I think. And yet you express a different gesture with each one, which comes through in kind of body language, obviously the mask, but also through your tone of voice. And crucially, and very interestingly, your expression, the eyes say different things with different masks, although they're the same eyes. So I found very powerful performances just because they're kind of limited to that head and shoulders and mask. But maybe you could say how you sort of got from the ideas to the performance. You might have covered some of it already, but
yes, I mean, yeah, it's a good question. I think, the whole nature of mask performance is a kind of huge field in itself. There are many companies that I've worked with over the years who've used masks, and I've been working with masks and researching it and performing it with masks and directing masks and teaching with masks for whatever, 30 odd years, 35 years. And there are certain kind of key principles that the mask only lives in relation to an audience, for me anyway. So, you can put a mask on in your room and try and sort of, I don't know, do stuff, imagine things. But it's like when you eyeball an audience and the audience reacts, then you kind of have a life. There's a life. So I say something and you nod in the audience, or you gasp, or you get it. And so, there's no fourth wall. So doing them on the video was particularly weird, because I would do it and then see myself, and then I'd watch the video and go, no way, this is not engaging with the audience. This is like me up my own bottom here. This is like, it didn't feel authentic. So, in part it was about bringing the mask alive. Does it fit? Can I be seen? Are my eyes being seen? Can you hear me? So there's all of that stuff. And then it's like, am I authentically coming alive with it? And the second part of what informed the way I did it was working with, Willie Bento's work that I cited earlier, his research on personality disorders and the Zodiac. He wasn't really looking at the Zodiac very much. He referred to it a bit. He's an astrologer as well as being a clinical psychologist, but he was interested in the movement of these different personality disorders. So he saw personality disorders as manifesting in the body, in particular, in a dominance, in a particular way of moving. So he did a great piece of research. He basically, he said, okay, there are 3 planes of space. If you analyze space, there's a lot of research indicating you've got 3 planes of space. You've got the forward back, you've got the left right, and you've got the up down. So the forward back plane of space is called the frontal plane of space. The up down is called the horizontal plane of space. And the left right is called the sagittal plane of space. And he said, okay, how does this connect? Unfortunately, I wasn't able to spend enough time with him to get to the bottom of how he made those connections. But he did a lot of research, and he discovered that you can either be in the frontal plane in the front, or you can be in the frontal plane at the back, or you can be at the frontal plane forward and back, or you can be in the frontal plane frozen inwardly. And then this is amazing. So what he did, I'll just show you something here. I love this, because he said, okay, so the frontal plane in the front, the fixation in the front arises through the narcissist. So the narcissist is always in the front. They're always pushing through. It's always about them. They're going forward. They can also be, if it wasn't a narcissist, you could say, somebody who's very forward, open, and leading. You know, a lot of narcissists, a lot of leaders, a lot of politicians have a lot of narcissism. Actors do as well. Not all of them, but, you know. And so you got the narcissist. So, you know, both in creating the mask and in wearing it, you know, so we got Aries, okay? And, you know, this, when I was playing it, I started to use these particular fixations that Bento had come up with. And it started to inform the way I was. So you'll notice, for example, if you look at it like Aries, I'm really like, I'm forward. You know, I discovered that these actually help the embodiment of the mask. So even though I was only using the top half of my body because I wanted to keep it tight, I could have done it another way, but, you know, I was using what I had, my eyes, my mouth, but I was driving it forward always in the face of the camera, in the face of the audience, speaking to them in a very domineering time. You know, and then, for example, with Capricorn, you know, he's frontal plane, but at the back. So Capricorn is very much back here. So he's like very different, and affects the voice, it affects the eyes, it affects the breathing, you know, because the personality disorder associated with Capricorn is paranoid personality disorder. You know, so on the one hand, you've got the extreme paranoia where, you know, your body leads, but your head follows, you know, you don't want to get engaged. But on the other hand, you know, it's making space for a lot of spiritual things to come through. Mm-hmm. If it wasn't paranoid, you know, you've got something that's deeply sinking into the sort of spiritual essence of things, but can become completely terrified of, you know, being fun being taken with them, being ripped off, being not seen as, you know, who they really are. So, you know, so the planes of space and the movement in the planes of space informed the sort of, once the mask was inhabited, it informed the particular kind of movement directions that that each of the different videos has. And that's a research which you can make available to anybody who's interested. But it's, yeah, I find it amazing. And I've been watching the guys in prison, and some of them really use these movements, you know. For example, there's a guy I've been working with. He's, I'll just keep it short. He's, I don't know what his zodiacal sign is, but I feel like he's got Gemini personality. You know, he's very intelligent. He's very scatty. He's all over the place. He's very bright. And, you know, the movement for him is, well, for Gemini is moving between left and right in the sagittal plane, moving, you know. And if you watch him, you know, even if he's not doing it outwardly, he's always like one thing here, one thing there, you know, and he's like, whoa. And so, you know, when I was playing Gemini, that really informed the movement. So, you know, bright, intelligent, creative, but at the same time can be completely chaotic, can also not have any friends, because he's always like, this guy doesn't have many friends, you know. He's funny in a way, but it's not with heart warmth. It's like heady funny. It's bright, it's intelligent, but he's actually really lonely. Mm. It's like some comics, you know, they're really lonely. They don't have a lot of friends. So I don't know, that he really made me think he's very Gemini. So, you know, the movement you can see if you watch people, I think, you know, it's not about typology so much as just observation. What is this movement about? Mm. So I find that very interesting.
I wondered if you could say, we talked, or you talked about the, you know, where the ideas for the project came from, how it originated and started. Could you say something about where it's going? You know, how you would like the project to be used, how you aim to use it?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's like, you know, with art, people are free to take it how they like. You know, I feel like as an artist, I don't want to say anything, you know, take it or leave it, use what you can, you know, it's kind of, if it speaks to you, great. If it doesn't, it's fine. You know, so there is that it's people are free to kind of allow it to work on them or not. But for me, you know, in hearing some of the feedback is, you know, I would recommend people not only look at their birth signs, which is always interesting to look at those, but, you know, look at them all, even if you got your one eye doing something else, because what happens is there's something about all of them that create a whole. You know, they are a group that make up a whole and speak in a certain respect to humanity as a whole, in terms of kind of personality structure types. And so, you know, my sense is that if people can take the time, and I know it's quite a lot because some of them are, you know, very intense and they're a lot to digest and all of that. But in terms of taking them and making sense of it, is just to see them all and just kind of muse, because actually the content is very full and intense, and some things will speak to you more than others. So, you know, working as a psychotherapist and thinking about what I'm going to do with the masks now and this work is, yeah, it might be another question of yours, but I'll just go there because it leads in. So, yeah, you know, for me, the masks are, on the one hand, tools to enter more deeply into a particular concept, a particular idea, a worldview. So, you know, I run workshops. I haven't run any workshops with these masks yet because they've just been created. But, you know, to be able to enter more deeply into what it is that's behind the idea by embodying it. So the whole nature of embodiment kind of leads one to an experience outside of the head, outside of the sort of cognitive conceptual framework within which we make meaning of the world. But the mask can lead us through the body into an experience of it. And then we can stop and step out of the mask and go, wow, what was that? What the fuck was that? And then kind of go, oh, well, that was a bit of this, that was a bit of that. How do I relate to that? You know, because when I did them myself, I did them over 12 days, you know, between Christmas and you know, into the new year. And, you know, by the time I finished 12 consecutive days, I was like, whoa, I want other people to have the opportunity to do this, because, you know, there's something about that experience that made me feel for a moment like I got it. Something about the nature of the human being, I've got it. You know, maybe I haven't got all us in our entirety. Of course, I think there's a huge amount not there, but on a personality level, I felt like for a moment, for a couple of hours, that, you know, I had an experience which enabled me to grasp, like, oh, fuck, this is what it is to be human. This is what, as human beings, we are all kind of connected to in some way. And I felt an incredible, like, relief. But it wasn't even in my head. It was just kind of like almost like a visceral experience. Then I could reflect on it afterwards. So I would want people to have that experience. Whether they'll get it, you know, whether it actually is meaningful for other people, I don't yet know. I know through other mask sets that I've made around planets and temperaments and commedia dell'arte and, you know, different stages of phasic development and etc., that they have been helpful for people to enter more deeply into these things. And I'm hoping that that'll be the case with the Zodiac. But let's see, you know.
Well, I'd like to underline that by, well, first of all, confessing that when you first sent the videos and asked for feedback, I watched a couple right the way through and then some bits of the others. And then I thought, well, that's enough. And a whole hour, that's so much to watch. And it's a lot to think about and to take in when you watch. In preparation for this conversation, I watched all 12, one after the other, and it's a totally different experience.
Okay.
Because you have an experience of the wholeness, as you just said.
Okay, great.
And I don't know if I could put that into more words than that, but you feel you've kind of been around the world and you've got it. So I'm thinking we should draw to a close, unless there's anything you're dying to add that you feel hasn't been said, you'd like to say. Loads more we could talk about.
Yeah. No, I mean, I so appreciate being able to talk about it because, on the one hand, I've been kind of engrossed in the whole process over the last couple of years, alongside my other work in prison. But to be able to reflect on it from the outside is helping me understand a little bit, what I've been up to. And I think some of the questions you've asked are some of the same questions that people have asked in their feedback. They'll see a video or two or the whole lot, and they'll respond. Some people will kind of go, this is like me, like you said, this particular video, I got that, that's exactly me. Other, and then they'll say, but this one is not like my partner, who's not like Gemini or Cancer, whatever. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like I was able to talk to that a little bit, which, I'm really grateful for your questions. I think you really got some really good questions, and I'm grateful for having gone through this, and that you've taken the time to watch, and I'm really grateful for your feedback about that, because my experience of having made them all gave me a certain hit. And it sounds like on some small level for yourself, having gone through the hour of them all, there was something that landed for you. So, that's very helpful. Yeah. Thanks. And I'm also aware that there are problems with it, potentially. And it's not all straightforward in terms of what I've done. And I, your questions have been kind. You haven't wanted to sort of pull me over the slab and kind of go, what you doing, mate? So I, thank you for your generosity.
Okay, thank you, Mike.
I'm going to stop the recording.
Yeah.
Stop there.